Hello. It's a book. Sorry, not a CD. But it's what I feel like talking about, and it's about music, a band. So why not? Um, I've been reading this for the last 2 weeks. Come as You Are. The original title is Come as You Are, the story of Nirvana by Michael Azerrad. Azerrad, never sure how to pronounce that. But this is a kind of updated version, as you see it, the amplified or annotated edition of Come As You Are. Now, Come As You Are was originally released in '93. I read it in about the year 2000-ish. And I read, obviously, the original edition, because this updated edition only came out 2 years ago. I guess it was kind of like a 30th anniversary kind of type thing. I can't remember. I think there are several editions, because the original edition was '93, and obviously that was before Kurt had died. But I think he did a secondary edition with a kind of epilogue shortly after he had died, from memory, because I'm pretty sure the one I read around 25 years ago had the part, it talked about Kurt's suicide, and it one part in particular I remember being in it was the kind of, what do you call it, the memorial, not the memorial, or kind of, yeah, the fan memorial thing, where they played Chris and Courtney's messages over like the loud PA system, and like it was, teenagers in a park listening to it. And he talks about that here. I'm pretty sure that was talked about in that edition that I read. So the thing is, I've read so many books about Nirvana. I would say I read a lot of music books. My main, especially nowadays, it might have changed. It kind of used to probably be more general history I used to read, but or specific history. But now, nowadays, I'd say music books are what I've always read a lot of music books, but nowadays even more so. And I've read a lot of Nirvana books. This one is kind of considered to be the I don't know, the best. What do you want to call it? The gold standard, whatever. The other very good one is the Charles Cross biography of Kurt, Heavier Than Heaven, which just recently I heard that Charles Cross had died. Not that he's some big superstar or anything. It's just I was quite surprised he wasn't that old. What's another good one? And one that I haven't read and I've been meaning to read is the one by, I think it was Danny Goldman, who was their manager, or I'm pretty sure he was their direct manager. And he worked for Gold Mountain, and I think he's also still the Foo Fighters manager, if my memory serves me well. He obviously it would be very interesting to hear it from his perspective, I'd say. I've read Dave Grohl's book, the one he did, the Stories book. I've read Chris Novoselic's book, but his one was not really a biography. I read that a long time ago, about 20 years ago, 2005, 2006, of Grunge and Government. I've read, I can't even recall all the ones I've read. I'd say the top 3 bands I've read the most about. The Beatles is easily number 1. I've read a shitload of Beatles books. 2 would be, I'd say, Nirvana. 3 would either be Pink Floyd or Led Zeppelin. And part of that is because all those bands I was named have so much literature written about them. It feels like, I don't know, Slint or something like that. There's not a lot of books, any books written about Slint or other kind of lesser known, lesser famous figures. But my point is, I've read a lot about Nirvana since I was a kid, and so it's hard to remember what parts go with what. But it's kind of funny, having read this over 20 years ago, how much of I remembered, and little pieces, like bits of information. I was like, oh, that's where I read this first. Like I remember, just like a kind of a throwaway example is, I always remember the little sentence or paragraph about Chris Novoselic buying his first house with his wife, and how they were first looking for their house as Nevermind was kind of starting to kind of blow up because they could afford a deposit. And then after a few months of looking, they could afford to pay for half of the house. And then by the time they found the house, you know, they'd made so much money that they could buy the house outright in cash, you know. And that had always stuck in my brain for some reason. Not that it's very important or particularly interesting, but that is in this book. And I was like, oh, that's where I read that. Kind of funny coming back to it. So the whole purpose of this book is that, like I said, it's annotated. And the way that he does that is he uses two kind of font styles. He uses the kind of original text as this kind of bold, and then the annotated part, which is written just, you know, in modern day, is without bold. And it adds context and obviously a shitload of hindsight, which is kind of like a, I don't know, as an author, he kind of talked about this a little bit. As an author, that's kind of, I guess a double-edged blade, is that it's quite a privilege, I'd say, to go back to a work and update it and comment on it, and then kind of almost like some of the parts he kind of he says, well, that was not correct, or why did I use that particular sentence, or, you know, he kind of is criticizing or editing himself as he goes. And then also there's the massive hindsight of everything that happened. And like I said, the original edition of this was before Kurt had died. And so the reason why this book is kind of, well, I should say, the reason why I like it, and I guess why most people hold it in quite high regard, is that it has direct interviews with the band. It's not authorized, but it's I don't know what the phrase is. You know, authorized biography is where the band has complete oversight and I guess kind of editing, saying what can and can't be included. Whereas he wrote this book as an independent journalist, or author, whatever you want to call him, but he had direct access to the band, and the band were okay with him writing it, and they knew he was writing it, but they didn't have the ability to edit or change anything. But in saying that, and like he comments on this as well, is that you have a kind of a self-censorship going there, don't you? Because he didn't want to lose that access, and he considered himself a friend, certainly with Kurt and Chris, and maybe even Courtney, by the end of the book. And there's a little bit of what happened after that, where there was a I'll talk about that when I get to it. But it's it's I think it's candid, and it's not super flattering, but at the same time, I don't know, I was going to say you can tell it's written by a friend. No, I wouldn't say that. It walks a delicate line, and I think he does it very, very well. He gives the good and the bad without getting completely tabloid sensationalism type writing, but delves deeply into some very interesting aspects of the band and the characters, and especially of Kurt. Obviously, he's the main figure of the band and the book and everything else, and to do with Nirvana. So, you know, I'd say if you like Nirvana, you've probably already read this, but if you haven't, I would absolutely recommend it. I think the annotated version is I think the original version is fine. You could read that. It's not as though you're missing anything by not having the annotated version, but it adds something a little bit extra, and it's interesting. Anyway, what else was I going to say? There's one. The last chapter is a completely new one. What does he title that as? Is that titled Epilogue? Yes, okay, that's the epilogue. That's completely new. That's written in 2023. But this part here, which, yeah, see, this is the part we hear where he's talking about the memorial service. He's reading out, as he's writing what Courtney read over the PA, Kurt's suicide note. That was written after the first release. What does he call that? The final chapter. Okay, so the original release went up to this part here, I believe. Which is, what does he call that final chapter? Is that just chapter 10 or something? I don't remember. Chapter 15. No, I could be wrong. Maybe it wasn't released, but I'm pretty sure it says 93 on this. And yeah, anyway, it doesn't really matter. It's not, the structural release of the book is not neither here nor there. If you know a lot about Nirvana already, it doesn't really offer anything overall different. The little details you learn a lot about his upbringing, and everyone knows about like the divorce, growing up in a really quite shitty small town, isolated small town. The friendship with the Melvins, and how that kind of was like a real I guess window or doorway for him. Kind of discovering punk rock and all that kind of stuff. And then the early iterations of the band with the drummers and with Chad Channing, and finding Dave Grohl and so on and so forth. So that kind of general outline is obviously what he's following here. But yeah, he has Kurt available to go into detail and ask about things and to give his version. And then the same with Chris. And Dave obviously features the least because he's the newest and he's the drummer. But yeah, there's a few little parts. There's one updated part he talked about was before the In Utero tour, where Kurt invited, I'm talking about him, meaning the author, invited him along to a rehearsal, just like a rehearsal was literally just him and the three other guys. Maybe Pat was there as well. Maybe this was when Pat had joined. Can't actually remember. But it was just the band, is my point. And they went to the rehearsal space, which was in this industrial kind of storage facility, and the band went through kind of the set list style, preparing to play for the tour, and most of the new In Utero songs. And then they kind of just, it was winding down, and then Chris got out his accordion, and Dave picked up the bass, and the author, who could drum a little bit, he got on the drums, and he kind of had a 10-minute jam session with Nirvana, which is, not many people on earth can say they have that, with Kurt singing and playing guitar, Dave on bass, and Chris on accordion. What was the song they played? They did a jam session, and before that they did some kind of was it Kashmir? They did, because Chris was doing Kashmir on the accordion. But I just thought that's kind of like a cool little memory. Imagine having that in your if something happened in your life, and those kinds of things. And then he talks also a lot about his relationship with Kurt, and how Kurt often, how angry and pissed off he was getting about everything, and how the guy had a lot of kind of time, just kind of one-on-ones, talking to Kurt on the phone. Like Kurt would ring him at like 1 o'clock in the morning and just kind of vent for like an hour or two in the middle of the night, and they sounded quite close. And after that first suicide attempt in Rome, where he took like 50 pills and drank a bunch of champagne, this guy talked to CNN or something, Michael Azerrad, and when I don't know if it was, he reckons it wasn't Kurt specifically, he didn't know if it was Courtney or the organization, the management, they they freaked out about that he had talked to the press, and he never talked to Kurt. Between then and when Kurt died, he never actually talked to him again, which is only a relatively short period, really. But you can imagine that would be quite hard. Because like I said, they sound like friends. And then after, when Kurt died, he went to Seattle, and because he was kind of outside the circle now, like he was, I can't really emphasize how much he traveled on the tour bus with Kurt and Courtney, and I think one tour bus was Chris and Dave, and the other tour bus was Pat and Dave, and Kurt and Courtney when she would join the tour with Francis. And Michael Azerrad was on the tour bus with Kurt, like for 2 weeks. They traveled around, and kind of being shut out just for his death, and then him dying would have been pretty hard. But yeah, because he wasn't in the inner circle anymore, he couldn't kind of, when he died, he went to Seattle, he wasn't really able to kind of, I don't know, be part of that mourning of that inner group. But then Chris rung him, I think it was the day after the memorial. I was like, "Where are you?" And he kind of, Chris hadn't fallen out with him. I'm kind of blabbing here. Sorry, it's just, I guess it is a bit like, for me, Nirvana, sorry, I just got a message on my phone. For me, Nirvana is such an important band. And I guess so many people can say that, but when I was 13, that was really when I had started getting into music properly. Before that, I'd always liked music as a kid, but I liked music as a kid, whatever. I used to record songs off the radio sometimes. I remember I like AC/DC. I like MC Hammer. I like the Beatles. But most of it was just like whatever songs were in the air, it was in the air. But it was 13, that was 1994. I remember my brother was really into kind of grunge, Nirvana and Pearl Jam. And I met this guy when I was in third form, and I started that year, third form, which is year 9 now. I don't know what grade that is in America. I met this guy, he was in my class, called Mike, and we became friends, and he was really into music. He played guitar, and it was kind of the confluence of my brother liking it and Mike, my friend, liking it, and me coming to that age. I started liking it, and it kind of, the first band that I really remember feeling something about was Nirvana. And it would have been very soon, like literally around that time, because this was in New Zealand, the school year starts in February. It would have been February, March, where I kind of made friends with this guy, and Kurt died in April. So it was kind of right, all this kind of thing happened in a very short period. I remember having In Utero on cassette tape. My brother got it for Christmas, and we'd done some deal, and he gave it to me. And I had the dub version of Nevermind. And I remember halfway through that year, one of my friends got a version of Bleach. And I remember he brought it to school, and we listened to it on Walkman. And I can still remember his reaction. The first song on that, is it Blue or Floyd the Barber? It starts off, doom, 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 doom. It's kind of really down-tuned. And my friend said, is this, they recorded this before they learned to play the instrument, which for a 13-year-old kid is quite a kind of witty thing to say. He wasn't very impressed with Bleach. But my point is that they were huge in my life at 13 years old. And they never went away. Nirvana as a band never left me. And I remember when I was a little bit older, people move on from music. And I remember Pantera started getting really big. I never really got into Pantera. They were never really one of my bands. Now as I'm older, I can appreciate some Pantera, but still never really been a big Pantera guy. I don't know, too southern, maybe. Not sure what is it about exactly about Pantera that I never really connected with. But anyway, I mean, this guy mocked me because I used to be kind of, this is a different person. I kind of used to be friends with him, and I'd seen him for first time for a long time. He said, "Hey, blah blah, my name," and he said, "Do you like any music harder than Nirvana now?" Like in a mocking way, like you want to like Nirvana. I like Pantera or something. Basically that was what he was meaning, and I didn't say anything back because I wasn't a very confrontational person as a child, and but I remember I felt kind of like shamed. Not like I feel ashamed of Nirvana, but kind of shamed, like, oh, I guess the music I like is uncool now. Not that I give a fuck, but well, I did obviously because it made me feel shame. But I guess it didn't make me stop listening to Nirvana, and I can't remember a time. And then I kind of went through this period when I started playing guitar and bass guitar where I rediscovered them. Kind of when you start playing musical instruments and you learn the songs, you kind of reappreciate them. And yeah, Chris Novoselic is one of the reasons why I started learning bass guitar. I loved his bass lines. I still do. Like, I sometimes I play guitar, I put the backing tracks on where it's just the drums and bass, and so I'll play guitar over the top of it, kind of so I can keep time because I'm not a very good guitar player. And it really makes me appreciate Chris's bass lines, how much he added to the band. Listen to a song like On a Plane, which is such a kind of a simple song guitar wise and kind of, melody or whatever. But Chris's bass lines underneath are, it's not just the busyness, because fucking anyone could put a busy bass line, but I just feel it adds a lot to the songs. And so hearing these little stories about people's interaction with the band and the band doing this or that, it kind of, I like it. I guess it's kind of a little bit the teenager still in me, hearing these stories about Kurt Cobain and the other guys, and it kind of, I enjoy it. There was one funny part. Actually, I don't even recall this. I feel when I'm telling something funny, when I say it, it doesn't sound funny. I just make it sound boring and waffly. But there was a funny part in one of the annotated sections where he said, talking about how Kurt really didn't want to change anything. Kurt had the choice to, the chance to read this, which he did before it was released, but he wasn't allowed to change anything. The one thing he had asked to change earlier was he had listed his 50 greatest records of all time, and maybe that was going to be part of the book. And he called Michael Azrad on the phone and left a phone message saying, I like in a panic, I really needed to delete that 50 greatest records of all time. We can't have it in the book. It's going to annoy so many people, and people are going to get pissed off because I didn't put their band. And it's caused, the phrase he used was, it's caused a lot of problems in my household, and it's fucking ridiculous. And Michael Azrad discovered later it was that Courtney had been giving Kurt shit because he had added all these kind of indie and kind of unknown punk bands on his top 50, and he hadn't put bands like the Beatles or the Cars or, bands that had actually been quite important to him in his youth. And she said he was like just trying to be like a poser or trying to get indie cred or something like that, which I found quite funny, that he it caused like a domestic argument, and he wanted a message from the book. But yeah, I guess I really have just kind of waffled there. But it's a great book, and I really do recommend anyone with an interest in Nirvana to give it a read. It's got a few photos throughout. Most of the photos you've seen before. A lot of Charles Peterson photos. That photo there apparently is, like it says here, the infamous underwater. He couldn't lose buoyancy. The idea of it was obviously, taking off the theme of Nevermind, the underwater baby, was to shoot them underwater from a kind of perspective of coming towards the camera. And apparently Kurt could not sink. He couldn't get barely below the waterline. And so they needed him down there like how Dave's doing. And Kurt couldn't get down. You know, when you want to go underwater, you've got to kind of expel the breath from your lungs and your nose and stuff, and that helps you sink. Well, yeah, he was having major buoyancy issues. And apparently it was quite cold and windy as well that day. But anyway, there's Danny Peters, one of their drummers. It's a Charles Peterson photo. One of the what do you call it? Person who really is responsible for recording so much of that early 90s, late 80s Seattle scene, Charles Peterson. Show bill with Tad. Tad, a band you never hear about, eh? It's kind of crazy that they were, speaking of Tad, they were right there with Soundgarden and Nirvana and you know, the other bands, and or I was gonna say Alice in Chains, but maybe a little bit less. But they just kind of never broke through at all. So every single photo is Charles Peterson. Charles Peterson. Charles Peterson. Another book that was released, I don't know, probably about 20 years ago, or maybe less than 20 years ago, were his journals, Kurt Cobain journals, which I admit I did look at in the bookshop. Maybe I got out from the library a long time ago. It did, you know, a lot of it has been said about that it did feel particularly craven or exploitative to be publishing his personal journals. But at the same time, I don't know. Like, it's easy to say that, but then I looked at them. The other, I guess, big work on him and is Montage of Heck, which was I think was overly long. Had some good stuff in it, but it kind of, yeah. Again, I kind of meld different things in my brain together of what happened in those things I've watched or read or seen. But anyway, I'm going to leave it there. This is the first video I've made in a while because I've been busy and I've been this drama of life. Nothing major. Well, actually, it is kind of major, but nothing, I guess, seriously major. How would you describe it? It has a big impact, but it's not life or death or anything like that. So yeah, now that's basically been resolved and I can move forward in a bit of a clearer way into the future for myself and my family. My wife's also away at the moment, not connected, sounds like there's a problem, but she's, it's her mum's birthday back in her home country. Korea, I don't know if I've said before, my wife's from South Korea. And, or originally from South Korea. And her family's back there. And so she was there earlier this year with my son, but now she just went by herself. Kind of had a chance to do some stuff, because when she was there with my son, obviously she's looking after an 8 or 7-year-old at the time. And it's hard to kind of do things that she needs to do, like life admin and meeting friends and just kind of relaxing. And so I wanted her to have the kind of chance to go back and spend time with her family and her friends in a more relaxed way. So I kind of worked it so I could take some time off work, because my company was demanding I take leave because I'd accrued so much leave. After a certain amount of time, they write a letter to you and say, hey, you've got a lot of leave, Owen. You have to take some. If you don't take it, we're just going to stick it onto your roster without, you know, and you're going to have to take it regardless. So I thought, oh. So I organized it so I could take off basically 4 weeks, which I'm here to look after my son. My son's at school. He's a school kid. So I've got to be here in the obviously I pick him up in the afternoon, drop him off in the mornings, and got to cook his dinner and be a general father, and also take him to all his bloody extracurricular. Geez, nowadays extracurricular activities. When I was a kid, when I was his age, 8 years old, I didn't have any extracurricular activities. And I'm not saying I was hard done, but most people didn't. Some kids would play rugby, but not many. Some kids would play soccer, but not many. It was kind of quite a rare thing to play. Well, maybe not rare, but it wasn't a given, is my point. I started playing soccer when I was 10, and I played basketball. But by the time I started doing them, I did it more when I was kind of college age, like from about 12 years onwards. And I was old enough to kind of do it myself. Like I played badminton for a little while, and I played basketball, and I could get to the basketball games myself. I didn't need my parents to drop me off. Sometimes they'd pick me up or something afterwards. Whereas my kid, he does 3 separate extracurricular activities outside of school. At school, he does 2 other ones, but they're during school time. But it's 4 separate appointments per week. So on Monday there's 2 things in the afternoon and evenings. Wednesday there's another thing in the afternoon, and then Saturday morning there's another thing. Like you only got 1 kid. If you had multiple kids, you'd be near. My sister, she's got multiple kids, and she's all day, every day, going here, there, and everywhere. And it's expensive as well as the other thing. But you want to give them the most opportunities, and just I think playing sport is important. And I especially wish that I had more, I'm complaining about it, and then I'm saying, well, I didn't have those opportunities, but I kind of do wish that I had certain things, like like music, for example. Like my parents never really, I came from such a big family that my parents never really in depth tried to find out about my interests. Like, I was really into computers when I was a kid. We didn't even have a computer. And I feel that if my parents had really kind of encouraged and provided opportunities to me, I could have been working in IT, the dream. I could have been working in IT now, had maybe more of I don't know. And I like music as well. Like I was really interested in music, and obviously, as I talked about a million times here, I was never really, because I was a quiet kid as well, I kind of like floated under the radar a lot. And it kind of allowed me just to kind of, watch a lot of DuckTales on TV and Tom and Jerry and stuff like that, but not actually do much that could have helped me. A martial art. I wish I'd done a martial art, because my kid, he does a martial art. And I see, like, it's such a well-rounded thing for kids to learn, so it's like an hour thing they do a couple of times a week. And the first part, they just do general fitness, like a lot of stretching. Like he can do the splits, the full splits, and a lot of kind of conditioning and general fitness. Where to the point that he's quite a strong little kid. Like he can do like the body plank, like my wife does that, and him and my wife were doing it next to each other, and he was doing it for he could go on as long as he wanted, like 5-10 minutes, whereas we finish after a couple of minutes max. And then they do obviously the actual martial art itself, the forms, and then the sparring and the self-defense. Like he's got showed me these different self-defense techniques he's got, which whether they're useful or not, who knows, but just the fact that he has this kind of confidence to know them and use them if he wanted to. And then they also do a lot of kind of mental stuff as well, like about determination and sticking at things, and they do a bit of meditation, and just feels like a really well-rounded thing. Whereas you play soccer, and soccer's great as well. It teaches you a lot of stuff, you do practice, you do some fitness, and of course, just playing the sport itself gives you fitness. But it feels a bit more one-dimensional. You're getting the teamwork aspect, but whereas this feels more rounded. I wish I had that opportunity when I was a kid. Why am I talking about this? I don't know. But anyway, we'll leave it there. Thank you for watching.